This is John Hancock.
All right, let's do this. Going to have a guy by the name of David Hartley in a few moments. He's the reason I changed my name from David Hancock to John Hancock. He hired me back in 1980 and said, you got the job, but you got to come up with an air name. So we'll get the story behind the story. My morning show partner from Jacksonville, who now lives in Tegakay, Dave Scott, is going to join us in about a half an hour. Tony Mann, who spent a good many years, 13, 15 years or so, at the Big Ape down there in Jacksonville, good friend of mine, will join Dave Scott. We should see an Avett brother or two before the afternoon is over. Dolph Ramseur, their manager, will be here as well. A mystery guest at 4:45. And I can only think about two people. Well, Jim Szoke would have been here when I got here, and John Stokes would have been here when I got here. And then over there at 107.9, sunny 107.9.
Please don't say that.
Some guy named Bob Lacey, who I think they had just gotten off of some national syndicated television program, and he was doing a morning show over there with a guy named John Cosby, who's gone on to be the recording czar.
Yeah, the premier guy for doing that.
How are you, man?
Good. How are you?
I'm fine. I was my intent has always been to outlast you here. And even though you had, about a 13-year head start on me, but I figured, well, all I have to do is just wait till Lacey leaves the building, and then I can, but like I told John Boy and Billy the other day, I'm just tired. I can't wait for you guys any longer.
You know, I want to know what you are looking forward to doing.
Nothing.
Now, there has to be something.
Well,
I mean, having done morning drive, I'm going to sleep. When I do retire, way down the road, I'm going to sleep for about a year and a half.
The idea of waking up for 30 to 60 days with really not a whole lot on the calendar just appeals to me no end. And then I fully expect to get bored. And I'll go do some volunteer work, and I'll probably come back here and do a commentary and do some stuff. But and BT's been really good to me on that. So there's things I'll do. I'm going to continue my commercial stuff. And that'll continue almost immediately as we get into November. And Kids First, I'll get involved with Kids First around. So, I mean, and everybody that has retired, and especially media people, tell me stuff will find me.
Yeah, I have a friend who retired early. And I said, it's a little bit early. He was like 53, 54. And I said, you're going to get bored. And he said, nah, old people give retirement a bad name. And he's having a ball.
Well, I guess the thing I worry about the most is if I didn't get bored, then I'd sit around and my mind would go to mush.
Yeah.
So I somehow or another want to do something to exercise that muscle so that you don't just become a bump on the couch.
Who was the most memorable person you ever had in the studio?
Dutch Van Kirk, the navigator for the Enola Gay.
Wow.
Yeah, spent an hour with him in here one night and talked to him about every aspect of being on that plane that night and dropping the bomb. And
was he talkative? I mean,
oh yeah,
what was it like?
God, he was outstanding. And we asked him, long term, how do you deal with this? And he said, I really have to believe I saved more lives than we took.
Yeah.
And he talked about how it was an unknown. They dropped that bomb, and then they put that thing on full torque to get out of there because they weren't sure if the fallout would pull the plane back in.
Right, exactly.
It was fascinating, and just to be sitting in a room with a guy that had been in that particular place in history was fascinating.
Don't you think it's one of the real gifts of doing this sort of thing that you actually can meet somebody like that? Because the average person is never going to come in contact.
No.
I wish they could.
There's several moments, and you know this in radio, where you're sitting there and you're thinking to yourself, "This is so cool." I can't. Why nobody gets to do the Andy Griffin or Don Knotts, or I ran in. I literally knocked Mickey Rooney down right outside of that door.
We had him on right after you did.
Yeah.
Mickey Rooney. I couldn't believe it.
No, because and you're looking at him going, "You were married to Ava Gardner?"
I know it. Well, by the time I got him, he was so pissed off that it was a really interesting. He was just talking about everybody who ever gave him the shaft in Hollywood.
Well, and I had probably just knocked him down. I literally was running down the hall to do the TV commentary, and he came out of that door, and I ran right into him.
Yeah.
So it was one of those surreal moments where you're picking this guy up off the ground and saying, "I am so sorry," and all of a sudden you go, "Oh my God,
it's Mickey Rooney."
Mickey Rooney.
Yeah. So you've got a big smile on your face. How does it feel to have been at a great radio station for all those years? Because most people wash out.
It was the answer to my dream. I always wanted to work in AM/FM TV shop.
Yeah.
And so when I came here especially, we were all owned by Jefferson Pilot. I got to do that.
Yeah.
And the history of this radio station, which you know as well as anybody in this building, I still consider it Charlie Crutchfield's radio station. And so to spend the bulk of my career at a three-letter call, 50,000 water, suits me just fine.
Yeah. So no Colorado.
No, I can't afford it.
I was listening to you with John Boy and Billy as I was driving around yesterday, and I think they brought it up. And I thought, oh, wow, he's going to stay.
Well,
because Charlotte gets you. I mean, a lot of people don't realize it. But Charlotte, people say, well, I'm going to stay here for a couple of years. I'm going to move on to Atlanta or whatever. But there has always been something about Charlotte, and particularly if you're in broadcasting, this particular radio station, this building, despite the fact that it probably is filled with asbestos, there's something about it that keeps people.
Well, Grandpa, congratulations, by the way.
Yeah.
I have a 2-year-old granddaughter.
Right.
So I'm not so sure that would be worth going to Colorado for. And quite frankly, just from an economic standpoint, real estate out there, the house I live in Belmont now that we built a few years ago, the equivalent in Colorado would be an $800,000 house. I can't afford that.
Right.
So,
that's exactly right.
And then the other part is that every time my mind tells me I want to move back to Colorado, that's where I keep my soul. But every time I go back to Colorado, it kind of reinforces to me that I'm probably a lot more North Carolinian than I thought I was.
How does that play? Because, I'll talk about Maine all the time. You know, maybe I'll get a place up in Maine and live in Charlotte and go up to Maine. But the idea of the place being all alone up there kind of freaks me out a little bit. And the fact that there's no twang. I'm so used to the twang down here, the southern twang. They talk differently, even though I was born there.
Well, and you don't want to go through the winters up there more than I want to go out through the winters out in Colorado either. And they got great road crews, but I mean, it's still
right.
Now you trade humidity and all that stuff, but you do get used to it.
No, you don't. No, not the last 3 years. I don't know where you've been.
You asked me, what was your greatest interview? Because you spent a lot of time on this radio station as well.
Yeah, I had so many fun things that Gene Shepard was my number one interview, and most people don't know who he is, but he wrote A Christmas Story, the Ralphie movie.
Yeah.
And he wrote a couple of books, and he used to do a 45-minute a-night radio show in WOR in New York, where he would come in and riff for 45 minutes, and it was like listening to the guy with the voice. He was the guy with the voice on A Christmas Story, so he was my hero. And I got him on. I was so nervous, I was shaking. And I've never been able to listen back to the tape. Just the idea that I was with him. But as far as a big, well-known guy, Roy Rogers came through.
Yeah, very cool.
One day, and I was here. And somebody said it was the latter part of his life. And to look over at this guy, and I have a picture of me with him. I've got like a Fu Manchu mustache, dark circles under my eyes, a really hippie Jackson Brown sort of haircut. And I just look like I was malnourished. And here's a guy who's like 70, and he still looks like a movie star. Yeah. You know, you can see why he was that guy.
Well, I think you got that gene in you yourself. Thank you for coming by.
Thanks, John.
I appreciate
know you're going to be happy. I know we'll see you.
Well, no, you will, because I'll still be in the building from time to time. And when you finally decide to make the leap, let me know. I'll lend you some boxes.
It's a deal.
All right.
Thanks.
Let's go over to the traffic center in Boomer Von Cannon. So I try from about 1994 till about 1979 to get somebody to hire me back in radio. I'd had minimal experience, but I could not get anybody. I went to all the interviews and did all the all sessions and couldn't get anybody to hire me. And then I found out about a job that at a station that I listened to called KADE in Boulder. And KADE was a Boulder radio station, which made it cool to begin with, but it also was at the end of an era, or the beginning of an era, but back in the days when many cars did not have FM radios yet. And so KADE filled the void. They were kind of like an FM radio station on the AM dial. And so all of us that were stuck with AM radios were listening to KADE out of Boulder. And they had a morning guy by the name of David Hartley. And he was also the program director. And I finally got an interview with David Hartley, and he somehow or another hired me, but told me, you're going to have to come up with an air name because you're going to follow me on the air, and David Hartley and David Hancock just a little bit too close. So I went home and decided I was going to be Shannon Stevens, and woke up in the morning and decided, no, that's not going to work. I wanted people to know it was me if they heard me on the air, and I started thinking about John Hancock, because I knew from about fourth grade on they start pounding that name into your head. Now, what I didn't know was that David Hartley wasn't actually his real name either. So I should have just told him, no, you change your name, I'm not changing my name. But it didn't work out that way. Mr. Hartley, how are you?
I am over the moon that I'm sitting here talking with Charlotte's most beloved. I'm great. Thanks for having me.
No, thanks for, listen, there are just some people that are instrumental in a career, and it was you who finally said, okay, yeah, I'll hire him. And we did a lot of good work together. We did mornings, and we rented a 2-seater airplane and did traffic reports, and we were the little station that could. And that was kind of your mentality that made that station that way.
Well, at the time that you walked through my doors, I was a little bit desperate because I was having problems keeping the air staff because our AM station was a daytimer. We were only on from dawn to dusk, and people would use us as a stepping stone, which kind of applies to you too when you look at it, toward bigger things. And so, good looking, great pipes, and like as you said in the lead-in, we already had a David, and the first 7 letters of our names were the same, D-A-V-I-D-H-A, and back in those days, I don't know if it's still the same, but ratings were very, very important, so I didn't want to have the audience confused, and besides, I was David, and I was already there, and I was the program director, and it was all about me.
You did... You did weird things at that radio station, if I remember correctly. Did we not give away the #1 morning show in Denver, Hal and Charlie, one day as a prize on our radio station?
Yeah, we had low budgets for sweeps time, so while other stations were giving away thousands of dollars and trips to Central and South America and things like that, we had to be a little bit more creative because we didn't have that kind of a budget. So that was in the day of the big individual radio contests, not the big national ones where you text to whatever. And so we got creative, and I had a kind of a slight sideways relationship with the other morning show. They were the top-rated show in the market at that time, and I just called up Hal Moore one day and said, Hal, this is David Hartley. We'd like to run a contest over the sweeps, and I'm wondering if you would be our prize, you and your pal Charlie. And Hal laughed, and then he says, "Well, sure." And we just went in from there, and that was probably the highest numbers I ever had on that station. Was when we gave away Hal and Charlie.
You're listening to the voice of David Hartley, who, when he left KADE, he and had already started a voiceover career. And you've been doing that ever since, and anybody that hears those baritone pipes right now can pretty much tell that was your calling. Did you ever miss, once you got out of radio on a daily basis, did you miss it?
I used to dream about it. I'd have dreams about, and of course we were always music-oriented, that the song ended, and somehow the equipment went down and we had nothing but dead air, and, the panic kind of thing. So I did dream about it for years and years and years, even as long as a decade after I left the air. That dream would pop up every so often.
We got, and I'm almost out of time, but we got, at one point, we hired some guy who was a senior, I think, over at Colorado University to do sports for us, and his name was Rick Riley. And Rick went on to become the #1 Sports Illustrated writer and is one of the top writers still in the country. But I remember Rick doing sports for us, and I had him on years ago and tried to remind him who I was, and he had no idea when I told him. But when I said Sky 12, then he knew who I was.
Yeah, Rick doesn't remember me either, I think, conveniently. But and Sky 12, speaking of Sky 12, that was one of the scariest moments in my entire radio career. Is we were doing a stadium show doing traffic, and Boulder is like a funnel. There's only one big road in and one big road out. And Charlotte's most beloved was up in this little 2-seater airplane.